Good afternoon, and we're going to take just another minute or two to let everyone log on, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. All right, my watch says 12:02. Let's go ahead and get started. I don't want to take any more of your time. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is our second webinar in our series. Today's is Getting the Buy-in, How to Sell Your Selected Solution Internally. And last month we had a webinar on how to evaluate and select the best legal ops solution for your team. So this is the second part of that process, and we'll be referring back to it a little bit. Today we have with us a few panelists. I am Bryce on the board. I'm your moderator, and I'm the operations manager at Big Fork Technologies. And today we have with us Ed Dean and Ron Hertz, who will be introducing themselves. Ed, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to talk with you today. I am a former marketplace executive for about 27 years in my career early on, and have in 2004 moved on to come and help other nonprofits and church groups and others to navigate the business side of those organizations, and have been a part of being a change agent in many of those situations. So it's a pleasure to be on and to talk with you today.
Ron?
Hey, everybody. I'm sorry, Bryceland. My name is Ron Hertz. I'm the Chief Financial Officer at Big Fork Technologies. I have over 20 plus years experience in the private and public sectors of accounting and business. And I have probably negotiated and sold to executive management 30 plus software packages / products during my career, and hope to give you guys some helpful insight today.
Thank you. So today in our webinar, we're going to be covering who needs to buy in, what they need to know to buy in, and why they should buy in. And before we do that, we're actually going to dive into some of what we covered in last month's webinar, just as a quick refresher, because a lot of what we did in that webinar is build the blocks for how to generate the buy-in once you've made your selection. So using these strategies while selecting your software does help ease the process of generating buy-in once you've made that, by knowing your stakeholders and selecting a software that can resolve their pain points. You do gain their support by making their work more efficient. When it comes to demos and trials, by getting a thorough view of the product during this phase, it helps you understand what the product can and cannot do. And no solution has every feature, so understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the product does help you maximize the tools you're getting, and you can present solutions to any missing pieces during the buy-in process. Once you start comparing the systems, be sure you're comparing your apples to apples. Make sure you're comparing total startup costs and first year costs, because these are going to be a critical part of your cost comparison. The justifications you come up with during this process will help create the backbone of your justification to your leadership. So those pieces were just knowing your requirement, demos, and the trials, and making that final choice. And we're going to be referring back to these elements throughout our presentation, because they do lay that groundwork for the who, the what, and the why of generating the buy-in. So as we move forward, we're going to first address who needs to buy in. You might identify these people by who's suffering, who would be impacted by your purchase, who those stakeholders are that you identified in the selection phase, who owns the budget that this will be coming out of, or who can influence any of those people that were mentioned. Ron and Ed, how do you identify who needs to buy in and ensure that you haven't missed anyone in that process?
Well, I think, Bryceland, that you really touched on it. And going back to last month's webinar is some of the bullet points that you have here. Who is suffering? You know, it's really about what problem you're solving for and how and who does this problem affect. And that's where you're going to identify, if not the folks who need to buy in, certainly the influencers of those folks who need to buy in. You know, it's essentially those folks who are suffering and that you're solving the problem for, and then also the folks who will be impacted by the software. So for example, you know, a contract management system, maybe the IT folks aren't directly affected by the software, but certainly they're going to be the folks who are managing the software, installing plugins, updates, and doing your integration. So you need to make sure that you have those folks' buy-in, or the influencers buy-in as well.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add to that, Ed?
I think one of the things that oftentimes there are people that are that have a problem they don't even realize that they've got. And so as you've looked at who's suffering, you can look at places where departments that are struggling with overtime or other things, trying to make it all fit, all the work fit the time that's available and those kinds of things. And it's for many customers in my selling career, it was I needed to help them realize that they had an issue when in fact that they didn't realize they had it. And so sometimes when you begin to raise the questions or the ideas, that creates the interest and the buy-in to say, oh yeah, that's a problem for me too. So that helps them buy in and say, this fills my need, even if I didn't know I had the need.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great point, Ed. And just to add to that, one thing to be careful of as you start gaining buy-in and influencers start getting involved in the project, just try and be aware that generally leads to scope creep of a project. And it can, if not held in check, turn into a much bigger project than you had initially planned. So just be careful of that and try and keep people focused. And, you know, maybe you can put out to folks that, hey, this is the initial problems we're trying to solve. Let's get this up and running, make sure it works. And then this product has the capability, or there's other products you can bolt on that can help address that problem. So let us get this going, and then we'll work towards your solution as well.
That's fantastic. And one clarification, we had a question about when we're talking about buy-in, who are we talking about? And in this context, we're actually addressing buy-in across your organization, not only from your CFO or the decision maker who is making that budgetary analysis, but also gaining buy-in from those informal leaders, from those influencers, from various departments, because that will help you gain the buy-in of that decision maker. It will help you gain the buy-in of your CFO, and ultimately it will ensure that you have a smoother adoption process.
Yeah, look, there's no question about that. I think you're throughout the project or throughout the approval process, you're gaining buy-in, and that buy-in, you're gaining buy-in across the organization. And as you go to look for that final approval by department head or CFO or the budget owner, that buy-in needs to cascade up throughout the organization in order to get that final approval. You know, I've been in so many times looking for final approval to move forward and spend the dollars, and the CFO or the CTO would say, hey, did you talk to this person or these folks? This would really affect them. And it's either, hopefully the answer is yes, they're all on board. I talked to so-and-so, and then that issue's resolved. And hopefully it's not the norm, but I've certainly had times when I'm like, oh, I missed that person. I should have talked to them. And then it's kind of, you send it back down the chain and get that that approval that they're looking for before they will sign off.
Having been in a senior executive position where you send people off to be a part of a team that's doing the software selection, then all of a sudden they came back and here's this solution, and you've gotten no buy-in because there's really been no review at your level. And so, as Ron said, be sure that all of the leadership over each area that will be stakeholders in the decision have been briefed. And sometimes that's better done on a one-on-one basis up front than in a, hey, here's our decision kind of a meeting. So be ahead of the curve would be my encouragement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One example of this, and I'm actually going to move on to the next slide so you can see these recommenders, decision makers, economic buyers, and users, saboteurs. All of these could be the people that you're bringing buy-in into your system. One example from our product, so we provide a contract management, matter management, and product management solution called Allo at Big Fork Tech. And one of the ways that helps our clients kind of get the buy-in of their leadership is to actually first go often to their sales teams, because those teams have a lot of interaction with the legal team for contracts, for vendors, for customers, etc. And they really need to expedite that process. They want visibility. They want an easy process of requesting the information. They want a quick turnaround. And so going to that sales team and saying, this impacts you, we can actually improve our turnaround times. We can make this easier for your team and have a really clear storage process for those contracts is actually a very compelling way to get an additional department on your side, to get budget, etc. Have you had, in your experiences, Ron and Ed, have you had other examples where you might go to another department where it's going to impact their workflow pretty significantly if you can get budget for something that will help your area as well?
Yeah, I think certainly for me, growing up in the accounting finance department, and generally I think those who work in those departments understand that you're really tied at the hip or joined at the hip with the HR team. Whether the accounting manages a payroll or HR manages a payroll, accounting needs to get payroll information back from whoever manages payroll and gets that into the system. But also whoever's responsible for the payroll needs to make sure that the information is in there properly. And so generally it's HR who's inputting new hires. Certainly we have had, or I've had experience implementing and well, I guess first reviewing, identifying, then implementing new accounting slash ERP systems in which that software had a very significant impact on the HR team, and hopefully addresses pain points that they had. And when they're doing their new hires or their contract management or resume management or learning management systems, that hopefully when you're deciding or making the decision that, hey, we need to upgrade this software or buy some software to address these needs, hopefully your needs or your pain points and whoever you're working with that the software significantly impacts, hopefully you have similar pain points, or maybe not similar, but chances are if you have pain points, other areas are having pain points too. And it's imperative that when you're looking at software, that it not only addresses yours, that it addresses others who are most significantly impacted as well. And then obviously you're going to get a smoother, quicker buy-in from influencers of other groups. And hopefully it helps keep you away from that box on the lower right, the saboteurs, because if you aren't addressing other folks' pain points, then that's exactly what you will have, because everybody will be looking for a different solution.
Yeah. Speaking of those saboteurs, how do you approach them when they come along?
Well, I can tell you that I have, when I have people who aren't happy with the solution, I kind of walk through with them one-on-one, trying to identify their specific issues and how those specific issues will be addressed in whatever solution that I'm looking at. And certainly I've had times when their solutions couldn't be addressed or their issues couldn't be addressed with the particular solutions. And that's when you walk through with them, well, have you looked at this? What are you proposing to fix or identify this issue? And maybe there's not software, but maybe there's upstream changes that we can make with other impacted parties to help make the saboteur's life a little better and identify some of their issues. So it's really, it's generally better from my experience to work one-on-one with them, and hopefully somebody from the management team of whatever department's affected, and try and rectify their issues. Because obviously if you continue on a path, it's going to make it tougher to get management buy-in if you can't get rank and file buy-in.
I'm with Ron that oftentimes the saboteurs are the ones you have to want to talk to one-on-one. For me, it becomes trying to determine what are their motives. What is it that's causing them to, to say, I'm not sure I'm up for this, or I don't like this. Is it simply workload? Is it that truly this is not a solution for them? They don't believe in it. Understanding those motives up front. And my experience says that who the saboteurs are for the most part well in advance. And those are people that if you can go create the buy-in up front and have them as champions in the room, as the presentation's made, you win. So having some knowledge, and that can require you to interact with other leaders and HR and others to say, okay, where are the saboteurs in this particular department? Saboteur is really a tough word. Many times it's just that they're the ER in the room who's looking for the fatal flaw so that they don't have to spend any time doing work, if you will. They're just work avoidant.
Do you have specific advice on how you can turn a saboteur into a champion? How you can bring them around?
Well, that goes back to, if I can understand their motives, then I can understand how to position the solution for their advantage. Or many times some of the saboteurs just need to be invited into the discussion. They haven't been a part of the process. And so their first answer is no, regardless of what the issue is. And so going up front and saying, hey, I need you to be a part of this, and encourage them on a personal basis, I see as a good motive or a good operation or method.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think that's a great point, that a lot of times that your saboteur is well, I've got a problem too, and nobody's addressing that problem. And so they're gonna just make a lot of noise. And generally, look, let's be honest, as Ed mentioned, you probably know going into the project who's going to be the squeaky wheel. And if you get in front of that, I think your life will be a lot easier. But certainly, as Ed noted, that a lot of times it's just, hey, somebody wants to be included in the project and ensure that they're that the solution is also a solution for their issues as well. And I think just kind of bringing them in and showing them how it's going to help them, that kind of lessens the issues that you're going to have on the back end.
I agree. My experience with, I call them particularly passionate people. And
Nicer word, very nice.
and my experience with those particularly passionate people is sometimes they need to hear it from someone else. So someone on their team who's already engaged or involved and and understands what their workflow is in a better way than I have, or another person on the software transition team had been, who has already bought into that software and understands what their day-to-day looks like and how it's going to be positively impacted. That kind of help from an existing champion can be really helpful. And they've turned and become some of my better champions because they went from not bought in at all to bought in. And so sometimes it's a new voice, sometimes it's a new presentation, and sometimes it's just attention. Like both of you said, sometimes they just want to know that they've been taken into account.
Yeah, the one other piece there is fear. Many times people at various levels have fear for their job, that the software will replace my position and things like that. And early in my career, back in the 90s, I can remember times when we were saying, well, this will lower headcount and things like that. And Ron, the CFO, is always interested in headcount, things like that. But I've never seen it where our organization didn't find other places for people to go and things like that, that really their fears are unfounded. Yes, their jobs may change and things like that, but that's a whole security thing for them. And so being able to speak into that and say, here's how it might change your position and things like that will encourage them to get on board.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, certainly in this day and age where everybody's worried about automation or artificial intelligence taking over their job. And maybe it's just a selling point that hey, look, this is going to take away your mundane, repetitive tasks and free you up to do more interesting things that are going to help you feel more engaged and feel like you're making a larger contribution to the company rather than just sending out NDAs and filing contracts, etc.
Yes, that leads us very easily into that next piece of, okay, we know who needs to buy in, but what do they need to know to buy in? And we've talked about how that might change their job or how it might change their day-to-day. Is there anything else that you would use to determine who needs to know what? This might be a really good place to actually start to bring in that CFO conversation that we haven't touched on much. What do they need to know?
Well, I think so. If you kind of back up a little bit, I think for what folks need to know, I think that's probably addressed when you're looking at different software and going back to the big question is what's the problem you're trying to solve? And as you identify this problem, maybe you're going through this process for you or for another department or for a combined number of departments, then you should, if you're affecting somebody, you should at least give them the opportunity to sit in on the demos or help with build the requirements, kind of like how we talked about last month. And as you're going through that process, then you're going to hopefully with a collective group of those who are directly impacted, that group will understand and help identify others who may be directly impacted and certainly those who are indirectly impacted. And I think going through that process, you're going to find the issues or the big pain points that folks are having that you're trying to solve for. And as you hear those points more and more, I think as you go to get your buy-in with the management team, with the CFO, the marketing executives, et cetera, or the general counsel for that matter, then you've got a good laundry list of, hey, here's the issues we're trying to solve. This is how this product will solve them. And along with that, while we're solving this, this is going to be the cost, this is going to be the benefit, and this is how we're going to actually save more money, perhaps by spending this money. And I think then, you know, what they need to know is really dependent on who's the leader that is making the final decision. You know, I know in my experience being the controller of GoDaddy for a long time, it was generally the CFO at GoDaddy who had the final decision on products that I was, or software packages that I was trying to get approved. And I had been there long enough that I knew exactly the first thing he would look for. And so I'd put together maybe a 2 or 3 page presentation. And I always had the cost and the cost benefit first, because that was his most important issue or hurdle to get over. And once he saw that number and potential cost savings, et cetera, then he was ready to move on and talk about the rest of it. And for a marketing team or general counsel, maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's the focus should be on, hey, this is where your lawyers are spending time. This is how we're going to free up their time by taking over some of this contract management process or what have you. And then you kind of move to costs and cost benefit, et cetera. But I think that it's really dependent. You're going to identify your issues up front, and then what they need to know for the approval or the buy-in from the management team. I think just the focus really depends on your audience and their touch points.
Ed, I saw you nodding.
It's a big point that if you can identify their pain points and where they're going to come from. My approach has always been to, can I put myself in that other person's seat? And if I was in that seat, what are my questions? What are my objections going to be? And if in the presentation, you've got those things addressed, the questions never come. And so in that crowd mentality, sometimes when you're making a presentation, the more heads you get nodding yes through the process, the better off you are in the end when you look for the big yes to say, yeah, I get it. So it's taking a perspective and being sure that as you're presenting it and as you're talking to these saboteurs or others, to say, here's the things I would say and ask if I were in your shoes, and just include them along the way. So again, it's all about getting the head moving in the right direction. That's my sales background coming through, I suppose, Ron.
That's good. We have a timely question from an audience member. How can the GC or whomever is advocating for a new legal operations software overcome the pushback from leadership when they say things like, we aren't making major purchases during COVID-19, or revenue is down, this doesn't seem like a time to spend money? How can you overcome something like that when a software is going to actually help save you money, improve ROI, et cetera?
Well, look, I guess one of my arguments on those questions would be, hey, you know what, we're not going to be in COVID-19 forever. And look, if revenue's down, maybe business is down overall. And rather than laying somebody off, if we have folks who have some time, maybe some extra time, whatever, they're just not as busy as they were before. Hey, that's the time to actually get yourself ready for when business picks back up. We're not going to be in COVID-19 forever, we hope. But now's not the time to kind of hunker down and wait for it to get over. I think the best companies are out there identifying issues, processes, software that, hey, you know what, maybe this is the new norm. Maybe we are going to be working from home on a more consistent basis. Certainly, a lot of big tech companies have either announced, hey, we're going to allow people who are able to work from home forever now, or there's some out there saying, well, it's going to be at least the end of the year or maybe to 2021. Now's the time to be identifying software that's going to help accelerate or make that mobile workforce more industrious, more productive, and ensure that they're getting both the work that they need funneled to them, and certainly the work that's funneled to them, ensure that's getting done. I mean, right now is the time to plan on the future of the mobile workforce, because, you know, whether COVID-19 goes away soon or not, I really believe that the dynamics of business has changed forever. And I think people are getting used to this. You know, I remember a few years, well, I guess it's been quite a few years ago, that Yahoo said, hey, we're not going to allow anybody to work from home. We want everybody in the office. And I remember that GoDaddy as a company, you know, made the plea to those folks who were disenfranchised because they couldn't work from home to come work for GoDaddy, because we will let you work from home. And I think this is part of the process. Hey, we've got some great software out there that's going to help people work from home, make them ensure that they're productive, and help us ensure that their work is getting done without having to watch over their shoulders. You know, to me, it's the perfect time to be looking at different software solutions.
Ed, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think the organizations that are truly progressive and going to move forward are looking at this time of COVID as a time of opportunity, to say we can accomplish something now that if we were in the midst of our busiest times, boy, it would be really difficult to accomplish. But now is a good time to begin to do some of these things, to put them in place. And the companies that have got leaders at the top that are providing true leadership, they're the ones that are going to take advantage of this opportunity of COVID and whatever's going on with our economy, and say, how do we make the best of this, not to hunker down. There's, depending on your industry, but for the most part, now's the time for leaders to lead more than they've ever done it in the past years even.
I agree. And many of our Allo clients have actually written us since work from home began, and really just shared what we already knew, because we are a 100% remote company since the beginning. But they have shared that Allo has made this transition to work from home significantly easier. So software like Allo, where you can collaborate from anywhere, you have a document storage system that's going to keep everything in one place. You don't have to worry about the VPN or where your computer is or any of that kind of stuff. You're not digging through your emails trying to find stuff. There's a lot of great arguments for really enabling your remote workforce when you get a software like this. It eases your relationships with your other departments. It eases your relationships within your department and makes communication really easy. It makes tracking really easy. It reduces risk really easily. And so those are really good arguments, especially during the COVID-19 era, to include in that process of not only our businesses that are going to move forward going to bring in these tools, but we can reduce that risk. We can improve the lives of our employees. We can gain their trust, gain all of their input, and really move us forward as a whole organization at this time. That was a great question. Thank you so much to our audience. All right, so we've been through a lot of what they need to know. We've talked about some of the problems that can be solved. And a lot of this is stuff that we learned during that requirement phase. And we learned about that through the stakeholders. One thing that we talked about, Ron, was identifying stakeholders and make sure that we don't find product creep. Have you ever had a situation where you're actually identifying a stakeholder really late in the process?
Yeah, I can't think of one specifically, but I'm sure that we have sometimes. And I think what has happened in the past is sometimes when you have stakeholders doing their diligence on the software or the solution that you're looking at, say for example, you have IT come in and look at the security of the product or whether it has certain functions and how it will integrate into your company's current business or IT area. What I've seen is that through their due diligence or somebody else's due diligence, they will say, oh, well, you know, have you thought about this? We see this here. Have you thought about this other group because they have the same issue or ran into the same issue with some software that they were looking at? Maybe you want to talk to them as well. And I think that hopefully it's not terribly late in the project, but generally you see that during your decision making or your due diligence process where you bring in enough folks that you feel like you have tentacles kind of throughout the company who are looking at this and have some influence on it. And then those folks will say, well, what about this? Or did you talk to this person? So while hopefully they don't pop up too late in the process, and certainly I've had instances where I'm trying to get approval and maybe the CTO or somebody else will come and say, well, hey, this sounds like something that we had an issue with back with so-and-so, have you talked to them? And if it's significant enough, and then you've got to kind of backtrack and go talk to those folks. And maybe you can get an approval at that point, dependent on this other person's buy-in or agreement that it won't be an issue. But if you're doing your due diligence process right, hopefully you won't run into that on too many occasions. Although, look, let's be honest, things pop up that you didn't think about or that you just weren't aware of in the product, and then you have to circle back.
Ed, you were nodding. Did you have anything to say or just agreeing?
Well, I'm agreeing. The worst thing you could do is try to go back and act like you didn't get it, or that we didn't miss it. It's better to go back and say, look, we missed it. I'm sorry. I think great leaders can use I'm sorry to say to people, we want you to be a part of this discussion. I missed it. Please understand where we're at and let's talk about it, and bring them on board. But acknowledging versus just trying to push it on through, I think that's the worst thing you can do, is trying to push it on through and not admit that, hey, we may have missed it. And hopefully those are minimal times, as Ron said, but it does happen.
Mm-hmm. We've talked a little bit. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to comment on what Ed said, and look, as somebody who's been in the approver seat as well as the trying to get approval seat, you know, as Ed said, if you kind of get caught with your pants down, so to speak, you know, don't hem and haw your way through it. Just say, you know, I find that leaders appreciate somebody who's being honest and say, yeah, we totally missed that. You know, I apologize. Let me circle back and get that taken care of, rather than kind of fluff over it. Because look, your credibility is important when you're going through this process and when you're looking for approval. And I don't think missing something costs you credibility as long as you own up to missing it and feel like, wow, we really missed this, but you know, everything else is really solid. So let me just go back and circle back on that rather than, yeah, you missed it, but you tried to fluff over it and make it a non-issue. I think that really hurts your credibility, where owning up and saying, yeah, we totally missed that. I think that then leaders get the feeling, yeah, we're all on the same page and go in the right direction. We're not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. Let's just, let's make sure this isn't an issue and we're ready to move forward.
Wonderful. We have another question from our audience, and they said that they keep hearing from their leadership that they don't need to buy third-party software because they can build it in-house. And they're hearing that from their leadership and their developers. And the product never gets built for their team because those developers are focused on customer products. So how can they convince their team that they do need to buy and invest in outside products?
Well, I can jump in here. I would say that, and coming from an experience at GoDaddy where that was the mantra, where, hey, why do we need somebody else to build this when we know exactly what we need and we can build it ourselves and we've got, you know, a bunch of developers? Well, you know, essentially you have to understand that somebody like Allo who's building the software, not only building the software, but also a significant user of the software. Hey, they know the ins and outs of the software and have a plethora of people working on the software that's their job every day, all day, rather than pulling somebody off a different project within your company trying to work on something where they're trying to build something from scratch. A lot of times, well, I would say just about every time that somebody who's selling a solution understands the pain points of the integration of the solution, how this solution is going to integrate with your various other solutions that you're using throughout the company. And when you're trying to build something internally, you're competing against people selling the software who live and breathe this software, and you've got somebody who just got pulled off another project to try and build it, who is probably also saying, geez, why are we building this? Why can't we just go buy this from somebody? And so I think that's number one. I think number two is generally, if you really look at the cost benefit of building a product from scratch versus buying something from somebody such as BigFork with Allo, that if you really do the math correctly, there's no way that you're going to build as functional a product as Allo, for example, and do it in a timely, cost-effective manner that would be a better solution for the company than purchasing the software from a third-party provider.
You certainly want to acknowledge that we could do it in-house, but is that the best use of our resources? Not just dollars and cents, but you know, moments of thinking and focus. Is it worth it for us to move off? And my experience has always said that to create something from the ground up is very costly and is fraught with mistakes. And so if you can find software that meets the needs in a cost-effective way and keep your organization moving forward, that's always a win. Check the box, do the job.
In addition, one of the tools that I've used is if they can build it in-house, that's wonderful, but how much ROI could we actually have gained in the waiting period between when we submitted the request and when it was delivered to us? Because in instances like, and I'm going to use the example Allo because I know it so well, we've sunk 2 years into developing this product and over $1 million. We have curated this for lawyers. so that they can solve problems within their organizations very easily. And your ROI goes up very quickly when you begin using that product. So it's not just the cost benefit analysis of how much is it going to cost our development team and how long, but what could we have saved during the time that we were waiting for that product to come into play.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Bryceland. When I refer to cost benefit, and I think what you're referring to is the opportunity cost that you
Yes.
have to build into that, which is, I believe, what you're referring to there.
Thank you, Ron. All right, so we've talked about problems to be solved. We talked about what they need to know and who needs to know. So now we're going to talk about why, reasons why we can get people on board. What kind of facts and stats can we provide? So often this is going to be information that we're sending to our executive team and CFO. This might be to our stakeholders as well, but we've really talked about how we can bring those stakeholders, those other stakeholders, those informal leaders, et cetera, on throughout the early parts of the process. So moving a little bit more toward that back end, the executive team, the CFO, the decision maker for the budget, how can we express the whys that we've come up with during that making the decision, that making the choice piece, when we compared all of the software and we know all of this information? What are those whys?
Well, I think that's without understanding it, I think that's really, to me, the easy part when you're going through the process, because there's obviously pain points. Otherwise, you wouldn't be going through this process of trying to select a particular software. And I think a lot of it is just laying out those facts. For example, I'll go back to my example earlier with the accounting group and the payroll group. You can come up with really hard examples of, boy, we were doing this, the process is so bad that somebody came on their first day and they weren't in the system yet because our process wasn't there. That's a bad employee experience, excuse me. And while it's hard to put a dollar amount on that, there's certainly a morale function of that. One that you put a dollar amount on is, hey, this going back to Allo and an NDA is, look, we thought we had this NDA, we didn't have an NDA, and now this company that we talked to or we presented to are out there, and that we thought they were going to be a customer, and now they're a competitor because they took our idea and are now making it their own. So I think that's a great one if you're looking at lawyers on hey, now we've got to go defend our product, whether it's a patent or whatever, and there's hard dollars to be examined there. Another great one is when you're looking at cost benefit is, here's the time saved in the process. And while time saved is nice, then, that can be translated into hard dollars. And, everybody talks about, well, they're going to save 20% of time, somebody's time over this particular period. And that's well and good, but you have to have hard facts and details behind that, where, okay, 20% of the time is we're going to save that here, and maybe this person is going to save 10% here. And because of this time savings, we had a headcount budgeted for next year. We're not going to need that headcount anymore. And, there's hard savings right there in salary, and not only salary, but, there's everybody knows there's significant overhead costs in each additional headcount that you that you hire. So I think it's the sell is, and again, going back to who are you selling it to? CFO, it's hard dollars. Where are my cost savings, and specifically identifying those cost savings. And for those that it's hard to identify hard dollar savings, there's plenty of examples on, hey, this is going to improve morale because somebody's not having to send out NDAs all the time and manage the NDAs when they're an attorney or a paralegal and they really want to be doing this other stuff. And oh, by the way, this other stuff that they're going to start doing, we had been farming out to third-party legal counsel. Well, guess what? We can take that in-house now because we're not spending all our time on contract management and NDAs. So there's significant savings there. So all of a sudden your soft savings or soft improvements, you can work your way back. And all of a sudden, well, you know, we spent $200,000 on outside counsel last year because of this. We're only going to budget $150,000 of outside counsel because we brought a lot of that work in-house. That's the kind of things that people listen to, they can get their arms around, they can understand, and it's real hard dollar savings, not some fluff savings that we're going to save 20% over 5 years when we have this product.
So you're saying if I say we can cut the number of systems we have from 5 to 1, saving time and money, you can say that, but then I have to back it up with the actual stats.
Absolutely. If I'm an approver, I would say, what systems are we doing away with? How much is it costing us? What are we going to save? And along with that, okay, now the IT team, okay, well, they don't have to, they're only babysitting one system instead of 5. So where's my savings there? What are they going to do with that additional time? Are they going to maybe not cut a head count, but reallocate resources where a hire that I thought I was going to have to do, I now don't have to do? And look, as a CFO, and I think as a CFO, I love to hear that. As a, I'm sure Ed can attest to, if I'm a marketing executive who's managing a budget, you know, that's, and I don't have to hire somebody, but I can reallocate that budget into advertising dollars or something like that. I mean, that's a huge win that you turn that savings into additional sales or whatever else. Or it's another headcount in the legal department that's going to, that I'm paying this amount of dollars and I'm going to bring in twice that dollars from not sending that out to third-party counsel.
I think the line at the bottom of the slide is just profound. Details, facts help make the case. And if you try to get by with soft statements of what can be, that's more difficult. If you can prove the case and make the case of what the savings will be, and then say, in addition, we will be more efficient in ways that we don't even yet know. We will be better at our sales and marketing efforts, if it's me talking, because we've got information readily available at our fingertips that would have taken us hours at a time, that would never be identified. So prove it, and then say, now here's the additional will come from it as well.
Fantastic. One of the things that has come up is how can we show when that product pays for itself or when you get a return on that? And do you have any time frames in which that is a requirement when you start looking at the numbers?
Well, from my perspective, I think that needs to be laid out as you're looking for approvals. I mean, from me personally, I like to see a payback, if not all of the payback, a significant amount of the payback in the first year. If I can't get it in the first year, I'm very hesitant to do it, because look, let's be honest, after it's approved and you're into the implementation process, people are on to the next thing and worrying about the next budget cycle, etc. Things that happened in the past kind of get lost in the shuffle. So as I'm the approver, I want to see it happen quickly. And to me, quickly is within a year. If you can't show me savings within a year, then I'm probably not going to approve it.
Would you agree with that, Ed?
Ron's the financial guy. He follows the numbers harder than I do. I would
Okay.
simply say, be careful you don't get yourself caught up taking too long to make a decision.
Mhm.
Sometimes you can spend so much time making a decision that you miss out, and you just create frustration along the way. And so if you're going to take a project on to pick software, move through it quickly, be determined to do it. There's always some reason not to meet or we can't meet, but that's those kind of things where you got to push the organization to move through the decision process, make decisions, then get into the dollars and cents of it. And where's the right return at? It just depends, but certainly 1 year is probably a target. I can go to 18 months at times on some things I've done, but it may not be the greatest solution if I can't.
When you say move through quickly, how long do you think that that decision-making process should typically take?
I suppose that depends on the number of departments that are impacted and buy-ins that have to be created and things like that. But that takes somebody, a process that you've identified in a timeline to do it and be committed to it. The organization should commit to a timeline and and say we will make the people available, because oftentimes it's the people that aren't available like for a given meeting or a given time that become the problem. Uh, but the exact time I would be that to me, you'd have to look at the software. I I have a bit of experience with Allo, and would say that I wouldn't take more than 2 months would be alongside for me to try and make that decision. And I think it can be less than that if you get a focused team on the issue.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, we do have only 2 minutes left, but I want to get through any other kind of final notes that we have for our listeners. Ron, through your process, you were noting that you want to see those costs outlined and that you want to see it within a year. So you mentioned one thing of the outside counsel. What other legal operations elements might provide some dollars that may not be expected that you could save, that you can put in that presentation?
Well, I think some of those would be, you know, I think perhaps it would be more of, look, if I have this software, this software can be managed by somebody at a somebody at a lower level can manage this process, the NDA process, the contract management process. And then, so I can hire a new paralegal to manage this versus hiring an attorney to manage it. And certainly I'm freeing up more time from the attorneys by making processes that were at one point more painful, making them frictionless. For example, a contract review process where I need to have an attorney on it. I want to have an attorney on it, but boy, it takes a lot of time with circling back with other departments, getting edits, etc. I mean, that's one where Allo could really handle managing the edit process and ensure that I don't have a bunch of iterations out that people are reviewing wrong iterations. So maybe that's not only time savings in the legal department, but in other departments, if it's a marketing contract or something like that, where boy, I've had it in my experience where I'm reviewing a contract and I'll say, what's going on with this? None of my edits got in there. And then it's, oh, well, you're reviewing version 4 and we're on version 7. You need to be reviewing that. And, something like Allo can save you the time and headache of that, where the process is really more streamlined, and that you're looking at the most current version when you're reviewing and ensuring that your edits that you had proposed got in. And if not, then why aren't they in there?
So a lot of time and risk savings on that front.
Yeah, look, no question. The and risk savings is look, that's all part of it. By having the software that's automated, and then that your NDAs and your contracts, they're all consistent, because there's certain boilerplate language that you have to have in there, and that every contract that's being generated through Allo is going to have that verbiage. And then if somebody wants to take it out, then it needs to go through the review process, rather than you have an attorney in this office and an attorney in this office, and they're both cranking out contracts for different individuals. And boy, somebody's got that paragraph in and somebody doesn't. And then you run into trouble, and then you're like, oh my God, why isn't that paragraph in there? Well, this attorney said, oh, well, I thought that paragraph was optional and it wasn't required. It really streamlines and makes it easier, and it just falls into risk aversion.
Thanks. I do want to go ahead and wrap up because we're a little bit over our time. Ed, you've been nodding, and I want to make sure that there isn't anything final that you'd like to add to that statement.
People matter. In the process, people matter. Understand where they're coming from and what they've got to say, and acknowledge their pain and acknowledge the things that make a difference, and encourage them along the way.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed. Thank you all so much for joining us today and for reviewing what it looks like to get buy-in for your selected software solutions. I'm Bryce Board from Big Fork Tech. My email's here if you'd ever like to reach out to me. If you want more information on Allo, more information on getting buy-in, I'll be sending you some collateral following the webinar that you can utilize in your selection and buy-in processes. And I just want to take a quick moment to thank Ron and Ed so much for joining us today. Thank you for your insight and your expertise, and for taking the time to share it with us.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Wonderful. All right, have a wonderful day. Thanks so much for joining us.